She had given him 7 months of the truest version of herself, and he had spoken her name like an afterthought to the people who mattered most to him. The night Annika Bryce took the elevator up to the 41st floor of the Harbour Tower in downtown Vancouver, she was carrying 2 things Corbin Hale didn't know about: his child and a tiny hand-knitted hat the color of winter fog, with a small maple leaf stitched into the fold. She'd found it at the Christmas market on the waterfront that afternoon, tucked in a wicker basket beside a woman who made them herself. The woman had looked at Annika the way people look when they understand something without needing to be told. "First time?" she'd asked. Annika had said yes before she had fully decided how to feel about it. She'd wrapped the hat in tissue paper and tucked it into her coat pocket, and then she'd stood at the edge of the market with the North Shore Mountains visible across Burrard Inlet and the cold, salt air coming in off the water, and she had let herself feel it completely. For approximately 5 minutes on a Thursday afternoon in November, Annika Bryce was purely, quietly, terrifyingly happy. Then she'd taken a rideshare to the Harbour Tower, and everything she thought she understood about the next chapter of her life began coming apart before she'd even reached the lobby. She had been with Corbin for 7 months. Not publicly, he didn't do public. She had understood this early and told herself it was reasonable given who he was. Corbin Hale, co-founder of Hale Meridian, the development firm that had built 1/3 of the new towers on the North Shore and was currently in talks to reshape the entire False Creek waterfront. His name appeared in the Globe and Mail twice a month. He sat on 3 boards. He wore his wealth the way certain men wear a good coat. So naturally you forgot it was something he'd acquired. She had assumed, going in, that there would be distance. She had prepared for a man who was present only in the ways that suited him. But the private version of Corbin was nothing like the one she'd expected. He read her messages the moment they arrived and responded immediately, even at 2 in the morning. He asked about her patients without using it as small talk, actually remembered their names and their stories. He had driven 40 minutes in November rain to her clinic on Commercial Drive the Tuesday. She'd had a difficult end-of-life conversation with a family that left her unable to get off the bathroom floor, and he had sat with her in the parking garage until she was ready to move. He didn't try to fix anything. He just stayed. She was a family doctor. She ran a small neighborhood practice with a candy bowl on the reception desk and a mural on the waiting room wall painted by a patient's 10-year-old daughter. She was 31. She was not a woman who needed rescuing, and Corbin, to his credit, seemed to understand that without needing to be told. She loved him. She had spent 4 of those 7 months monitoring the feeling carefully, the way you monitor a strange noise in an old building, alert, cautious, not wanting to misread it. By month 5, she stopped pretending she had any control over it. The Harbour Tower had a private entrance on the east side of the building, a passcard access corridor that bypassed the main lobby. She had her own card. That was how their relationship worked: secondary entrances, private corridors, the access granted to someone who existed in the parts of his life that were not for public consumption. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself tonight she would tell him, and everything would reorganize itself into something that finally made sense. The corridor ran alongside the northeast corner of the building. His penthouse occupied the full upper floor. The private dining room, the one he used when the firm's partners gathered for what he called family meetings, was on the west side, closer to the main entry. She should have been nowhere near it. She had taken a wrong turn somewhere after the security door. She still couldn't fully account for it afterward. Her hands were cold. She kept reaching into her coat pocket to touch the tissue paper, the way you confirm something you're afraid to lose. She turned left when she should have turned right. And then she was in the short hallway that ran alongside the dining room, and the door was not fully closed. She heard his voice before she heard the words, that measured, unhurried register he used in formal company, the voice of someone who knew that every room he walked into would accommodate him. Then she heard her name. It was another voice first, older, confident, Someone at the table making conversation the way people do when they're comfortable enough to say anything. What about the woman you've been seeing? Annika something? And Corbin answered. She did not move. Something in her body simply refused the instruction. She stood in that hallway with the tissue paper in her pocket and the dark glass of a corridor window behind her, and she listened to the man she loved explain who she was to the people who made decisions about his life. Annika? His tone was light, almost fond, the way you're fond of something that no longer applies to you. She's not part of this picture. I've been thinking of stepping back from that. Edmund's right. The Bergman arrangement makes more sense for where the company is going. Solange and I have known each other a long time. It's practical. A brief pause. Annika's good. She's not the life I'm building. Not the life I'm building. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach without meaning to, the same gesture she'd been making in the elevator on the way up. Instinctive, protective. Now it felt different. Now it felt like she was trying to shield something from the sound of his voice through a door he didn't know she could hear. She stayed in that hallway for less time than it felt like. Then she walked back through the corridor, through the security door, down the east stairwell, out through the building's side exit onto Burrard Street. It was raining. It was almost always raining in Vancouver in November, that particular West Coast rain that isn't dramatic enough to justify an umbrella, but accumulates in your coat and your hair, and eventually in your bones. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed. I was going to tell him tonight. She had the hat in her pocket. She didn't take it out. She got a rideshare home, and when she reached her apartment above the clinic, she sat at the kitchen table for a long time without turning on the lights. At some point, she took the hat out of her pocket and set it on the table. Cream and gray, the maple leaf on the fold, small enough to cover her fist. She booked the first BC ferries sailing to Swartz Bay the next morning, the 5:45 out of Tsawwassen. She was on the dock before 6, in the dark, with a bag she'd packed in 40 minutes. She did not leave a note. She did not send a message. She took her medical bag, her laptop, enough clothes for a week that became a month that became the rest of the pregnancy. Her mother lived on Dallas Road in Victoria, a small stucco house that faced the strait, 2 blocks from the seawall. Pearl Bryce was 66 and had the particular quality of a woman who had raised a daughter entirely on her own and understood exactly what that cost and would not be dramatic about it. She opened the door when Annika knocked at 9 in the morning with rain on her jacket and a face that told most of the story, and she said, "I'll put the kettle on." She poured tea. She sat across the kitchen table and waited. When Annika said, "Mom, I'm pregnant," Pearl set down her mug with the deliberate care of someone absorbing information that needs space. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is he going to know? He doesn't need to. Pearl looked at her. That's not the same as no. Annika looked at her tea. Outside, Victoria was doing what it did in November. That particular old city quiet, the Gary oaks dropping their last leaves, the light off the strait flat and gray and somehow gentle. Annika had spent her childhood watching that light from this kitchen. She had spent her adult life building other kinds of mornings in other cities. But this one still pulled at something underneath her ribs every time she came back. "I'm staying for a while," she told her mother. Pearl picked up her mug. "I know you are." The weeks that followed were ordinary in a way Annika hadn't expected. Not healed, not resolved, just the quiet forward motion of days. She walked the breakwater in the mornings. She took patient video calls in the afternoons. She photographed the Gary oaks losing their last leaves and the light off the water, and once, a heron standing so still in the shallows of the harbor that she thought for a full minute it wasn't real. She did not check his messages. He had sent 3 in the first week, the first one the night she left. Tentative, the kind of message that apologizes in its rhythm before it says anything specific. Then 2 more, a day apart. Then nothing. She told her mother about the hallway. She didn't tell her about the hat. Some things you hold because the moment you translate them into words, they become slightly less true. She felt the baby move for the first time on a Tuesday morning in December, standing at her mother's stove making oatmeal. Just the faintest suggestion of something pressing back, tentative, questioning. She stood very still with her hand flat against her side and breathed until her eyes stopped stinging. The hat was in the drawer of her childhood nightstand. She hadn't taken it out, but she hadn't thrown it away either. What Annika didn't know was that 700 kilometers northeast, in a glass-walled office above downtown Vancouver, a man was beginning to understand the full architecture of what he had done. Corbin had asked his building's concierge whether anyone had used the private corridor pass card that night. The timestamp came back at 7:42, 11 minutes before he'd said her name, like it was something he was already past. He had sat with that information for a long time. He didn't hire anyone. He used the same patient logic he'd spent his career applying to complicated problems. She had mentioned her mother's house once, in August, the street, the view of the strait, the way the Gary Oaks sounded in wind. He had been listening. He found her. He flew to Victoria on a commercial flight with a carry-on bag and a hotel reservation under his assistant's name. He booked 2 nights. He spent the first one in his hotel room on Humboldt Street, writing and discarding versions of what he needed to say. Every version sounded like a man trying to win something, and he wasn't here to win. He wasn't even sure he was here to apologize, not because he wasn't sorry, but because sorry, offered to a woman who had walked out into the November rain carrying a secret she'd been coming to share, was an almost insulting currency. He was there because she deserved to know that he knew. That was the only thing he'd settled on. He went to Dallas Road the following morning. Pearl Bryce answered the door. She was compact and unhurried, with Annika's eyes set into a different face, that same quality of paying attention to more than she was letting on. "Mr. Hale," she said, not surprised. "Mrs. Bryce. She's not here?" "She walks mornings, the seawall toward Clover Point. 45 minutes, give or take." He registered that she was telling him this, that she had opened the door, identified him by name, and told him exactly where her daughter was. "Charlotte told me about you," Pearl said, and then caught herself. Annika told me about you." A pause that said a great deal about what a mother's mind does when it's protecting something. Not everything. Enough. He found Annika 20 minutes later on the seawall, standing at a railing above the water. She was wearing a heavy navy coat with her hands in her pockets. The mountains across the strait were out for once, rare for January. And she was looking at them with the particular attention of someone doing the work of not thinking about something. He sat on the bench behind her. She didn't turn around. "I heard you coming," she said. "I know." She turned then. She looked at him in the flat January light, and he held her gaze and didn't perform anything with his face. He just let her look at whatever she needed to see. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Not how did you find me, something more specific." "Because you were in that corridor," he said, "and you didn't make a sound, and you left. And I need you to know that I understand what you heard." Something moved through her expression, there and gone. "Understanding it doesn't change it," she said. "I'm not here because I think it does." She looked back at the water. She shifted slightly, and he registered, for the first time, physically, the visible fact of her pregnancy beneath the heavy coat. She was nearly 5 months along. Finding that out had been its own kind of devastation. Understanding not just that she had left, but what she had been carrying toward him the night he'd made, leaving the only reasonable thing she could do. "Are you well?" he asked. "I'm pregnant, Corbin, not ill." "I meant both." She looked at him. "I have a doctor. I have my mother. I have what I need." "I'm not here about logistics," he paused. "I'm here because of you. Just you." She studied him for a long time. The mountain disappeared behind cloud. A seal surfaced near the breakwater and was gone. "Go back to your hotel," she said finally. "I'll handle things myself." He stood. He kept the distance between them. "Is there anything you need?" The silence stretched. He saw something happen behind her eyes, a quick private negotiation between what was true and what answer she'd decided to give. "No," she said. He let her walk away. He sat back down on the bench when she was gone and put his face in his hands for exactly 1 moment. Then he took out his phone and extended his hotel reservation by 10 days. He didn't tell her. He didn't appear uninvited. He learned the rhythms of her life in Victoria. The cafe on Cook Street where she went Thursday mornings, the midwife's office on Fort, the route she walked to the water. He held this knowledge the way you hold something flammable, carefully, without squeezing. He stayed at the hotel, worked remotely, went running along Dallas Road in the early mornings when the seawall was empty, and told himself this was not pathetic. Some days he almost believed it. The trouble came from Edmund's direction, as he should have expected. Edmund Hale was older by 6 years and had spent those years building the operational infrastructure of Hale Meridian while Corbin handled the public face. He was precise, undemonstrative, and had a specific talent for resolving complications before they became problems. When he called on a Friday morning in February, the tone of the call told Corbin what was coming before any particular word had been spoken. "The Bergman people are asking questions," Edmund said, "about the doctor in Victoria. The Bergman arrangement is finished." A pause. "Corbin, there's a child involved now. The board has a legitimate— I'm going to stop you there. A legitimate interest in how this is structured, given the firms." "Edmund," his voice had gone to the quiet register, "do not send anyone to that house." The pause that followed was long enough to carry its own answer. He called his brother back 3 days later, after the courier had already been to Dallas Road. Pearl told him over the phone. Her voice was very level. "A man came this morning. He had a document and a check inside it, and a great deal of polished language about the firm wanting only what was best for everyone involved. There was one condition," she paused, "that the child be raised quietly." He was already in the rental car before she finished the sentence. He drove to Dallas Road in 11 minutes. Pearl had left the door unlocked. He found Annika at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood surface and her jaw set in the particular way of someone who is furious and has decided not to perform it. She looked up when he came in, not relieved, not softened, the face of someone who has just had a suspicion confirmed and is now deciding what to do with the confirmation. He sat across from her at the table. He called Edmund from right there, in Pearl's kitchen, with Annika watching and Pearl at the counter, making tea she wasn't going to drink. He said his brother's name. He said, "You sent someone to this house." He said the things that cannot be walked back once they are said in front of witnesses, not threats, not volume, just the clear and final language of a man establishing what is not up for discussion. He said them quietly, which in the Hale family was always the version that mattered most. When he set the phone down, the kitchen was very still. Annika looked at him across the table. "That's understanding it," she said. "Now I need to know if you're capable of actually doing something about it." "I know there's a difference," he said. "That's why I'm on a plane to Calgary on Monday." He flew to Calgary and sat across from his father in a boardroom with their family's primary attorney present and presented the full documentation of a restructured personal stake in Hale Meridian, not a severance, but a formal removal of the financial mechanism that had been used to apply pressure to a woman who had done nothing except try to tell him something true. He explained this without raising his voice, without apology for the inconvenience to the firm's preferred timeline, without the layer of managed deference he had spent his adult life building into every conversation with his father. His father looked at the documents. Then he looked at his son. "You're doing this for her." "I'm doing it because it's right," Corbin said. "Those aren't different things." His father studied him for a long moment. Something moved through the older man's face. Not quite recognition, but the beginning of it. "She must be important to you." Corbin looked back steadily. "She is." He flew back to Victoria that afternoon. He walked into Pearl's house on Dallas Road at 7 in the evening, and Pearl told him Annika was upstairs. He knocked on the doorframe of her room, and she was sitting in the chair by the window with the hat in her hands, the wool hat, cream and gray, the maple leaf on the fold. The one she'd bought at the Christmas market, the one he hadn't known existed until this moment. He stopped in the doorway. She looked down at it and then up at him. "I took it out of the drawer this morning," she said. "I couldn't leave it in there anymore." He didn't cross the room. He asked quietly if he could come in. She nodded. He sat on the edge of the bed, the old quilt, the wood furniture, the room that had been hers her whole life, and he sat across from her with the distance between the bed and the chair intact, and he didn't try to close it. "How bad was it?" she asked in Calgary. "My father didn't fight it. I thought he would." A pause. He looked at me like he was trying to figure out what I'd become. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I let the documents say it." She turned the hat over in her hands. The February light was going fast through the window. Brief at this time of year on the island, arriving late and leaving early. "You forgot to manage me," she said quietly. "In the beginning. That was the real thing, wasn't it? With everyone else you perform. With me you didn't have to. And when you were back in that room with your family and your business, you defaulted to the version they expected. Because you didn't know what to do with something that didn't require performing." He looked at her. "Yes. I know that's not an excuse." "I know you do." He paused. "That's the part that helps." Silence settled in the room. Outside, the Gary Oaks were bare and still against the dark. "She kicks," Annika said. Something shifted in her expression, involuntary, unguarded, real. "In the evenings mostly. She already has opinions about when she's awake." He didn't move toward that information too fast. "Does it hurt?" "No. It's strange, like she's in there keeping her own schedule." "She sounds like you," he said. Annika looked at him. He looked back. She extended the hat toward him then. Not an offer of closeness, an offer of the thing itself. He reached out and took it carefully, the way you take something from someone who has been carrying it alone for a long time and is only now deciding to set it down. It was lighter than he'd expected. The stitching was very small. He held it in his palm and felt, beneath everything else, something without a clean name, grief and gratitude pressed into a shape he wasn't going to try to simplify. "I need time," she said. "I'm not saying no to anything. I'm saying I need to know the difference between what's actually changing and what I want to believe is changing. Right now, I can't always tell them apart." "That's fair. I don't want to make a decision about us while I'm in the middle of everything else." She gestured slightly at herself, at the pregnancy, the uprooted life, the whole complicated weight of the past several months. "Annika," he held her gaze, "I'm not here to make you decide anything. What I signed in Calgary isn't contingent on any decision you make. I'm going to be here whether you let me all the way in or keep me at arm's length indefinitely. That's not a negotiating position. It's just what I decided." She was quiet for a moment. "Ask me again in a year," she said. He understood what she was leaving open. He nodded. "Okay." She stood slowly, carefully, and extended her hand for the hat. He gave it back. She held it for a moment and then set it on the nightstand, not in the drawer. On the nightstand, where it could be seen. She gave him the room at the end of the hall. Pearl had put fresh sheets on it 3 days earlier, which said everything about the women in this house and what they understood before they admitted it aloud. He moved in. He learned where things went. He learned that Annika's back hurt on the right side, and that the heating pad lived in the bathroom cabinet, and that she liked her tea very strong, and her mornings very quiet, and that the quiet was not an invitation to fill it. He drove her to every appointment and sat in waiting rooms without checking his phone, and did not make the moments about himself. He learned, slowly and without announcement, what it actually meant to be useful to someone who didn't need rescuing, who needed, instead, the specific and ordinary competence of someone who showed up, stayed, and paid attention. Edmund wrote a letter, not a legal letter, a personal one, handwritten, with no Hail Meridian letterhead. He did not expect forgiveness and said so in the second sentence, which Annika read twice, both times without speaking. She set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a while. "It's a start," she said finally. She said it quietly, mostly to herself, in the voice of someone willing to hold open the possibility of something, without committing to where it leads. The baby came in April, 3 weeks early, at Victoria General, while Pearl stood at the delivery room window and the rain came sideways off the straight. She arrived with the particular indignation of someone who had decided on her own timeline and wasn't interested in discussing it. Annika worked through it the way she worked through everything difficult, not performing endurance, simply exercising it. She didn't ask him to leave. He stayed. He was useful when being useful was possible and present when it wasn't, and he did not fill the silences with reassurance she hadn't asked for. At some point in the small hours, Annika reached for his hand. She didn't look at him. She just held on while something moved through her, and then relaxed. She didn't let go after. He didn't mention it. At 6:22 in the morning, his daughter was born. The nurse turned to him. "Would you like to cut the cord?" He looked at Annika first. She was looking back at him, her face completely open, every layer of distance stripped away, just her underneath, purely present. She nodded. He cut the cord, and then they put his daughter in his arms. She was small and certain and warm, already frowning at the overhead lighting, with the focused displeasure of someone with opinions about ambience. He held her and felt the weight of everything that had led to this room, the corridor he hadn't known she was standing in, the hat in the nightstand drawer, the ferry she'd taken in the dark, every inch of ground between that November night and this April morning, and it was too much and not enough, and exactly right, all at once. He looked up and found Annika watching him hold their daughter, with an expression that was not yet everything restored, but was the ground on which everything restored could eventually grow. He did not say, "I'm sorry," he had said it. He did not say, "I love you," he hadn't earned that back yet. He said, "She has your forehead." Annika looked at her daughter and almost smiled. "I know." They named her Edie, not short for anything, not a family name, just Edie. Annika had decided it on the second morning in the hospital, looking at her daughter's face with the particular clarity that arrives after you have pushed through something enormous and come out the other side with your understanding of what matters fundamentally reorganized. "Edie," she'd said. Corbin had repeated it. It fit the way true things fit, without requiring explanation. The months that followed were not romantic. They were interrupted sleep and learned rhythms and the steep learning curve of two adults who had not planned any of this together, figuring out how to function in the same space around a person who communicated entirely through volume and body language. Corbin adapted fast. He'd built a company on this capacity, the ability to absorb what a new situation required and adjust to it without ego, and now he applied it to understanding why Edie wouldn't settle after the 2 a.m. feed, staying with the question patiently until something worked. Annika watched this happen and did not comment. She was in her own process. There were days in the first few weeks when the accumulated weight of everything landed all at once. The birth, the recovery, the months of carrying everything alone that had immediately preceded it, and she sat in the nursing chair in her room and felt something that was love and grief pressed together into a feeling without a name. She let Corbin see it once. That was the beginning of a different kind of conversation between them. Summer came to Victoria slowly, the way it does, the light building for weeks before it finally commits. Annika went back to work part-time in July, taking video calls with her patients in the afternoons, making small plans for eventually reopening the clinic to full hours. She photographed Edie the way her mother had always photographed her, not posed, not curated, just the actual thing. Edie asleep on Corbin's chest on the porch, while Pearl read in the garden, the particular light off the straight in August. The hat, finally taken out of the nightstand drawer, placed on Edie's head one September morning, the maple leaf sitting crooked above one ear. She took that photograph and left the print on the kitchen table for him without comment. He looked at it for a long time, then he put it in his wallet. October arrived, 1 year since the Harbour Tower, 1 year since a corridor and a door that wasn't fully closed, and a sentence she had spent 12 months learning to carry and then learning to set down. She woke that morning to rain on the window and Edie making the specific noise that meant negotiable, and Corbin already in the hallway saying, "Hey, hey," I've got her in the low voice he used at night, that she had not expected to find comforting, and did. She lay in the dark and listened to him settle their daughter in the next room, his voice through the wall, patient, unhurried. "I bought that hat a year ago today," she said when he appeared in the doorway afterward. He leaned against the frame. He didn't say anything. "I was standing at that market completely sure about us," she said, "completely sure we were something real." She looked at the ceiling, and then I stood in that corridor and listened to you explain to your whole world that I wasn't. I know. I believe you do, Ask me. He looked at her. "What you said in January on the seawall." Her voice was steady. "When I told you to ask me again in a year." Something shifted in the room. "Annika," he said. She waited. "Do you love me?" She held his gaze in the October dark, the rain on the glass, the mountains invisible behind cloud, Edie asleep down the hall with a maple leaf hat folded on her dresser, a full year of every inch earned between the night she'd walked out of the Harbour Tower and this particular morning in Victoria. "Yes," she said. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't the end of the work. It was one true thing said plainly, without embellishment, in the full weight of what it had cost to be able to say it. He came and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't reach for her. He sat in the October dark, with their daughter asleep down the hall and the rain on the glass, and the whole quiet, ordinary fact of the life they had built from what was left after everything fell apart. After a while, she put her hand on top of his. He turned his hand over and held it. They stayed like that for a while. Outside, Victoria went on in its particular unhurried way. The oaks, the strait, the edge of the continent, where the land runs out and the water takes over, and there is nothing left to do but be present to what is actually in front of you. What was in front of them was ordinary and specific and entirely irrevocably theirs.